What's up, guys? So today I want to talk about treating your symptoms as opposed to treating your dysfunction or the cause of those symptoms. So last weekend I was at I was giving a seminar at CrossFit Buffalo, and in general I had a lot of novice athletes at that seminar attending. So basically they had a very short or small training history. So one thing that was very different in working with them is that they didn't have a preconceived notion of what training was supposed to be, right? So one of the big eye openers at a lot of the seminars is that, or the active life workshops, is that when people find out they should be carrying and doing step ups just as often as they squat, that's usually a big surprise to them, right? And what movements they're doing when they train and how often they should be training at low intensity, etc., is usually a big surprise to most people. But because it was such a novice group, a lot of them didn't already have that preconceived notion developed, and that also speaks to the programming at CrossFit Buffalo. They have some very educated coaches who work a lot with us, so their program reflects that, right? So they're not that shocked by those movements. Those aren't foreign movements to them. What was interesting, that was the biggest eye-opener for them, and what I kind of played to more with them, is that just because something hurts doesn't necessarily mean that's the problem, and obviously that means it shouldn't be the focus of whatever remedy or intervention you're trying to make. And I'll kind of give a couple of examples of that. So there was one attendee who was having some serious back problems. She's been an athlete for a long time, been training for a long time. And through her tests, she had a little bit of a butt wink in her squats, but her technique was pretty solid. She moved very well, but no matter what, especially when squatting, she was getting a lot of back pain. And it turned out that she was very, very weak working on a single leg. Her step-ups were very weak compared to the rest of her numbers, and her one leg was a lot weaker than the other, right? So we identified that most likely what's causing her back pain is her inability to work on a single leg, and on top of that, the fact that one leg is a lot stronger than the other, right? That's going to cause all kinds of different compensations when she is squatting and when she's doing a lot of different exercises, running, etc. That's going to start to cause some dysfunction, and her symptom of that dysfunction ended up being back pain because of how she as an individual compensated, right? That's going to be different for everyone. So that doesn't mean that everybody who has back pain is going to be weak on a single leg, and that doesn't mean that everybody who's weak on a single leg is necessarily going to have back pain. But in her case, right, we ruled out a lot of other things, other mobility, other strength balance issues, and her training volume, etc. And we found that to be the biggest, and it was a major glaring issue, and that made sense why she was having that back pain. So her intervention is going to be different than somebody else who struggles to deadlift and has back pain, versus in her case, somebody who struggles on a single leg and has back pain, right? So same symptom, but a totally different dysfunction is going to lead to a totally different intervention. And that's why it's important to test all of those things and not just say, oh, I'm having back pain, I better treat my back, or I better go see a doctor for my back, right? That's like, imagine you're riding a bicycle and you're riding along and you get a flat tire, right? And you might notice a little bit of a difference, but you can still ride that bike with a flat tire. So you just keep riding, right? You do that long enough and your wheel is going to start to bend, right? And once that wheel starts bending, it's going to get real difficult to ride that bike, okay? And eventually you're not going to be able to, okay? So now you're going to say, oh, my wheel is bent and that's why I can't ride my bike. I'm just going to go buy a new wheel. And you go buy a new wheel and it's good to go. Great, you have a fresh new wheel, you start riding it. It's still a little slower, but it's a lot better than it was, right? You still haven't addressed that flat tire. So what's going to happen when you keep riding that bike with a flat tire and a new wheel? That new wheel is eventually going to bend, and you're going to say, oh man, I thought I fixed it, I felt better, I'm just going to go get a new wheel, and I guess this is what I'm going to have to do. Every couple days I'm going to have to go buy a new wheel. When I haven't identified the problem that's actually causing that wheel to bend is the flat tire, right? So that's kind of an analogy to what's going on with the human body when you start to see that, right? Imagine she went to the doctor and he said, oh, you've got a herniated disc or a little bit of disc irritation here, which most people do, especially somebody with a training history as long as her. With that longer training history, there's a good chance she's going to have that. But the doctor might see that, identify that as the problem, and start to treat that, right? And that means going to physical therapy for the back, right? Not training to avoid injuring the back. Eventually, maybe it leads to injections. Eventually, if it's bad enough, maybe the doctor says, oh, you're going to need surgery, right? When all she actually needed to do was get stronger on a single leg and kind of change her training a little bit, her protocol, and she could have avoided all those problems, right? So this is why it's very important to assess yourself 100% as far as your strength and your flexibility and mobility go. And if you are seeing a doctor, I'm not saying don't see doctors when you're in pain, but see somebody who understands the body as a whole system and looks at it that way, right? Somebody who understands what you do in the gym and your training, etc., and is able to speak that language, okay? Because otherwise, that's what you're going to run into. They're going to treat your symptom as opposed to trying to diagnose the dysfunction and the cause of that symptom, right? And you can 100% miss the mark, and that's why you're going to end up being unsuccessful with that treatment. It's going to get very frustrating when, if you would have actually identified it initially, it would have been a relatively, not easy because you have to do work, but a simple fix, right? And a very effective fix at that. All right, thanks a lot, guys. Any questions, feel free to ask.